Does the person you are with encourage you to read? You have to ask, what does he bring for me? Roses or books? If someone has a stake in making you better, that person will push you towards books. Books are what we all need.
Pranam Acharya ji. I had the following question while reading Asadi Var verses. Shalok, first Mahal. Dukh daru sukh rog bhaiya ja sukh tam na hoi. Tu karta karna मैं नाही जा हारो करी न होई. बलिहारी कुदरत वसिया. Suffering is the medicine. Dukh daru. And pleasure the disease. Sukh rog bhaiya. Because where there is pleasure, there is no desire for God. You are the Creator Lord. I can do nothing. Even if I try, nothing happens. I am a sacrifice to your almighty creative power, which is pervading everywhere. So, now begins the question. While I was reading that suffering is the medicine, I remembered that we only recognize and value our physical health when we are sick. Otherwise, we do not, as we take our health for granted, a given. By the same token, nonetheless, even in our general state of suffering, why is it so hard for us to recognize and turn toward truth? Why do we keep turning our back to it? Thanks for your guidance. With gratitude, Thomas. Look at how it unfolds in our daily life, Thomas. You'll get the answer there. There is no big secret here. You are asking, even though people suffer, why doesn't the suffering make them turn towards the truth? The Gurus are teaching here that suffering is the medicine. So, Thomas is asking, if suffering is the medicine, then I see suffering everywhere. Then people should have had the medicine and people should have turned towards God, the remedy. But why doesn't that happen? He's saying, even in our general state of suffering, why is it so hard for us to recognize and turn towards truth? Why do we keep turning our back to it? Why does that happen? We can look at it in 2 or 3 ways. It's all happening within us, is it not? 1, do we really call suffering as suffering? Do we really call suffering as suffering? If, let's say, lust has overtaken you, you are firmly in the grip of lust. How does it feel? Without rushing to quick conclusions, go close to that state. How does it feel? Without having any images of that state, go close to that state. Can you be attentive in those moments? Can you be wise in those moments? Are you left with any discretion in those moments? Are you peaceful in those moments? Are you? Do you even remember well in those moments? Does your memory serve you in those moments? Are you left conscious of the results of your deed in those moments? Are you? Now, without using the word lust, if I just ask you, how would you feel if you are peaceless, memoryless, discretionless, attentionless? You would say, oh, that would be a state of great suffering. But the moment the word lust is attached to that state, you never call it suffering. In fact, you start craving for that state. It is not that in lust you crave. When you are not in lust, you crave for lust. Don't you? Please. In lust you do crave, but then lust too doesn't always come to you merely as an accident. Don't you invite it? Don't you crave for lust so that later in lust you may crave? And why would someone crave for lust? Had he known that lust is suffering. But we are very clever at giving names. Man is a label maker. Man is a label maker. Go to any of your pleasant states without affixing to them a pleasant name, and you will be horrified. You will find that the reality of that state always points towards suffering. You are about to get something nice. How do you feel? Is it not a state of tension? Please, is it not a state of tension? You are anticipating something big to happen to you. And if that which you are anticipating to happen to you is 2 hours away, how do you spend those 2 hours? What is the quality of your being in those 2 hours? You are actually suffering. You may even get a headache. But because you have called it a state of hope, therefore you refuse to call it a state of suffering. There is a lot in a name. Remove the word hope. Just go naked to the naked fact of suffering. Go without any beliefs, purely naked, to the bare fact of your situation in those moments of great anticipation. And you will find that you are actually suffering. But you will not admit that suffering. To put it more accurately, you will not admit that you are suffering. That's a great curse given to us. You know what? We suffer only when we admit that we are suffering. Which means that even when we are not suffering, we may admit that we are suffering, and therefore there is a false and virtual suffering for no reason at all. And when we are actually suffering, we may refuse to admit that we are suffering, and consequently we may keep proclaiming that we are in delight. Such is the condition of man. Our inner states do not correspond to facts. Our inner states correspond to beliefs. If you believe that you are doing great, you may just continue to ignore the fact. Oh, sooner than later the fact would catch up with you. Why? Because the body is a fact. And the body simply does not change according to the whims and fancies and desires of the mind. Or does it? So too bad for us. We may continue to live in Wish Town. But time would shake us out of our dream. But till the time we are not woken up, we keep wallowing in false pleasure. Are you getting it? Take the example of food. There are so many people who actually get their systems destroyed because they have been taking in all kinds of inedible substances, spices, chilies, alcohol, flesh. The chili is playing havoc with the lining of the inner tract. But do you call it suffering? You ask for a little more spice. The doctor lives in facts, so he will tell you, you are suffering. You will say, no, I am not suffering. I am enjoying. Who is right? You know what? You are right. And that's why the doctor loses and you win. The doctor may advise you 10 times not to take spicy food, you would still take it. Had you really felt the suffering, had you really acknowledged the suffering, you wouldn't have been able to take even one more morsel of the spicy food. But you do not admit that there is suffering. You call it taste. So suffering fails. Tamas. The gurus were simple people. And even their instructions are for the simple-minded. So they are saying suffering is the medicine. Not always. Not always. Man is capable of bearing tremendous suffering and yet continuing to live as if nothing has happened. And equally, man is capable of bearing suffering when there is no suffering at all. And that's how we live. Most of our sufferings are imaginary. We do not suffer where we must actually suffer. But we definitely suffer where there is no need to suffer. The fellow is soaking in all kinds of rubbish and taking in alcohol. And he is deeply anguished about how the stock markets would open the next morning. Look at his deep suffering. What is he suffering about? how the stock markets would open the next morning. Something imaginary is causing him trouble. And something that is so very solid, something that is so very direct, present, is just being consumed as a pleasure. It's like a cancer patient weeping buckets because there is a pimple on her nose. The cancer does not bother her. The pimple on the nose does. That's how we live. Obviously, we are suffering a lot. But we are suffering because of the pimple, not because of the cancer. The cancer we love to totally ignore. The pimple we are greatly bothered about. Then, Tamas, there is also the thing about faithlessness. When I began, I said, look at life and you will see how it operates. There are so many people who are confined in the wrong places. They are suffering there. But they still continue to live on. They still don't dare to breach the boundaries. They still return to the same households every night and they would return to the same offices the next morning. Why? They suffer in their places and yet do not leave those places. Why? Suffering fails on them. Why? Because they don't have faith. They say, even if there is suffering in this place, at least I have a place. If I leave this place, who knows whether there exists something outside or not. This is faithlessness. They do not say, let me leave this place and God will provide for me once I move out. I do not bother what would be in store for me once I am out. But whatever would be in store for me would be better than the suffering I am facing inside. They do not say that. They say that known suffering is far better than unknown freedom. They say, even if I am suffering here, at least I know what is going on. I know I receive a measured 16 slaps a day. Whatsoever is my condition within these boundaries is at least predictable. How many times a day am I slapped? 16. I know that. Even if I am suffering, the suffering is predictable. The husband would fight with the wife 4 times a day. The wife would beat up the husband twice a week. There is suffering, but there is no suffering that is unanticipated. And the ego loves it. The ego loves a predictable life. The ego wants to be in control. So when the ego is slapped exactly 16 times a day, the ego says, well done. See, it was exactly 16 as I said. I already knew it would be 16. That's how we are, In fact, the ego would not like it to be 15. Because if it is 15, the ego becomes insecure. Something is fishy. Today I didn't get slapped 16 times. Something new happened. The ego does not like the new. 16 slaps a day must remain 16 slaps a day. And outside, who knows what would happen. The house is burning. It has always been burning. I know the burns. Outside, I do not know what it is like. And the ego really does not know what it is like outside the house of suffering. The ego was born in that house, Everybody is born in that same house, the house of suffering. So the ego does not know what lies outside that house. Born and brought up and educated in the house of suffering. Predictable misery we have. Outside, everything is new, fresh. And that really scares us. So we say it is okay. It is okay. Or if you want to draw me out, give me proof that outside there is something better for me. But even that proof, you ask from those who are in the house. Now, what kind of proof would they give you? Had they had any proof, would they be found inside the house? So they have no proof. Instead, they discourage you. They say, are you the special one? Do you think you are the one with some unique wisdom? Look at me. Look at your elders. Look at the entire world. Look at your mother. Look at your uncle. What are all they doing? All of them are, without any exception, just suffering. Who are you, smart one, to escape away? And if you escape away, it would be so very insulting to us, no? Your father could not escape away. Your grandfather could not escape away. All the great residents of this house could not escape away. And now you are talking of making an escape. That would be so humiliating to the rest of us. So we will not allow you to go out. And obviously we cannot tell you that we are jealous of you. So we will tell you, son, in your own interest, we are advising you to stay in. No, we aren't jealous of you. We are your well-wishers. That's why we don't want you to cross the line. Stay here. That's how we are, Thomas. So we continue to suffer. So there is hope. There is the game of naming. And there is faithlessness. And if I continue to speak, I might speak of a few other things as well. But do I need to? I'm not sure. Look at any person who is obviously suffering, and you will know the story of entire mankind. In one man's suffering is contained the story of all of us. Once you have lived long enough inside the house of suffering, you also become conditioned to the suffering. And then suffering is not suffering at all, or is it? You adapt to it. So now where is the question of seeking a rescue? You are okay inside. You have spent such a long time within that the without is hardly appealing. After all, you have called that place your home. And who wants to leave his home? And then, if you somehow stumble upon the indisputable fact of your suffering, you say, I'm so old now and I'm well adjusted here. Who wants to begin a new life outside? I don't bother about how it is here. What matters to me now is that all that I have is here. Understand this? It doesn't matter to me how it is here. What matters to me is all that I have is just here. Even if I go out, what will I have there? All my possessions are inside, all my relations are inside. All my world is contained in the house of suffering. How can I leave them? And if I leave them, with whom do I live outside? And then, if at this ripe age, having spent half my life inside the house of suffering, if I go out, won't it be an admission that I wasted half of my life? Understand this. Having spent 60 years inside the house of suffering, if I now go out, won't it be an admission that I have wasted 60 years of my life? And it would be such a humiliating admission. I don't want to admit that. So man continues to suffer and yet not turn towards the truth, tapas.